The sun was beginning to dip behind the city buildings when Daniel parked his old delivery van outside a small neighborhood cafe. The faded paint, worn tires, and squeaky door made it look like it had survived 100 hard years. Daniel stepped out anyway, brushed the dust from his jacket, and took a slow breath. His hands were steady, but his heart was racing. Across the street, Sophia stood laughing with two of her friends. She had the kind of smile that turned heads, and Daniel had spent weeks gathering the courage to speak to her. He wasn't carrying flowers or expensive gifts. Just honesty. He walked over, offering a warm smile. "Sophia, could I ask you something?" She looked at him with mild surprise. "Sure. I know we don't know each other very well, but I'd like to take you to dinner sometime. I think you're someone I'd really enjoy getting to know." For a brief second, silence settled between them. Then one of her friends glanced at Daniel's old van and burst into laughter. Sophia followed her gaze. "You," she said, unable to hide her amusement. "You want to take me out?" Daniel nodded quietly. She folded her arms. "You drive that old thing, wear the same jacket every week, and think I'd date you?" More laughter surrounded them. "I have standards," she continued loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "I'm not interested in struggling through life with someone who can't even impress me on the first day." People at nearby tables turned to watch. Daniel could feel every pair of eyes on him, yet his expression barely changed. "I'm sorry if I made you uncomfortable," he replied softly. "I only wanted to be honest." Sophia shook her head. "Next time, try asking someone who doesn't mind living a small life." Her friends laughed again as they walked away, leaving Daniel standing alone on the sidewalk. For a long moment, he simply watched them disappear into the crowd. No anger. No argument. No attempt to defend himself. Instead, a faint smile appeared on his face. An elderly cafe owner, who had quietly witnessed everything, stepped outside. "Son," he asked gently, "how can you smile after something like that?" Daniel looked toward the busy street where expensive cars rushed past. "Because people can only judge what they see," he answered calmly. "Sometimes, that's exactly what they need to believe." The old man frowned, confused by the strange reply. Daniel climbed back into his battered van, started the engine, and drove away without another word. Hidden inside the glove compartment was a phone that had been vibrating the entire time. The screen displayed a single unread message. "Board meeting tomorrow morning. All directors are waiting for the CEO's final decision." Daniel glanced at it only once before locking the screen again. No one on that crowded street, not Sophia, not her friends, not even the old cafe owner, could have imagined that the man they had just mocked wasn't struggling to survive at all. He was hiding a life worth millions. And the real story had only just begun. Daniel's old van rolled through the city before sunrise, blending in with hundreds of other working vehicles. He stopped outside a small bakery and helped the owner unload heavy bags of flour without being asked. The elderly baker smiled warmly. "You're here earlier than everyone else again." Daniel simply nodded and replied, "A good day starts by helping someone." He refused the extra money the baker offered and quietly drove away before anyone could thank him again. Later that morning, he delivered supplies to a children's learning center. The children rushed toward the van, waving excitedly. "Daniel is here," they shouted together. He laughed as he handed out boxes of books and sports equipment. To them, he wasn't just a delivery driver. He was the man who always remembered their names and never forgot anyone's birthday. The teachers admired him, though none of them knew much about his personal life. Whenever someone asked where he lived or what family he had, he gently changed the subject with a smile. By afternoon, Daniel stopped at a small neighborhood cafe for lunch. Instead of ordering expensive meals, he chose the cheapest item on the menu. The waitress accidentally dropped his drink while serving another customer. She immediately apologized, expecting him to complain. Daniel only smiled. "It's just a drink. Please don't worry about it." The nervous woman thanked him, surprised that someone treated her with such kindness after such a busy morning. As he prepared to leave, a sleek black luxury sedan slowly pulled up across the street. A man wearing an expensive suit stepped out and looked directly toward Daniel. For a moment, it seemed they recognized each other. The suited man started walking forward, but Daniel gave a tiny shake of his head. The man instantly stopped, lowered his eyes with respect, returned to his car, and drove away without saying a single word. The waitress noticed everything from the window. "Do you know him?" she asked curiously. Daniel slipped on his worn jacket and smiled. "Just someone from another part of my life." Before she could ask another question, he climbed back into his old van and disappeared into the afternoon traffic. That evening, Daniel returned to his modest apartment. The furniture was simple. The rooms were quiet. Nothing inside suggested wealth or success. Yet when he opened a small wooden drawer, several neatly organized documents rested inside, along with a silver key engraved with an unfamiliar company logo. He looked at it for only a second before closing the drawer again. Outside, the city continued as usual. Inside, Daniel protected a secret that seemed far too large for someone living such a simple life. The question only grew stronger: why would a man with so much confidence choose to hide behind a worn jacket and an old delivery van? The next morning, Daniel followed his usual routine. He loaded his old van with fresh produce and household supplies, then started making deliveries across the city. Nothing about his life seemed different from the day before. Yet Sophia's harsh words still echoed in his mind. They didn't make him angry. They only reminded him why he had chosen this simple life in the first place. His final stop that afternoon was a small community library where volunteers gathered every Friday to organize donated books for children. As Daniel carried several heavy boxes inside, he noticed a young woman struggling to lift another stack that was nearly as tall as she was. Without saying a word, he walked over. "May I help you?" The woman smiled with relief. "Please. I thought I could manage, but I clearly guessed wrong." Together they carried the books to a reading room filled with colorful shelves and tiny chairs. The children thanked them before running off to choose their favorite stories. "I'm Emma," she said, wiping a little dust from her hands. "Daniel." She looked at his worn jacket and scratched hands, but there was no judgment in her eyes. Instead, she smiled warmly. "You must help here often." "Whenever I can." "That explains why all the children know your name." Daniel chuckled softly. "They're the best part of my week." Emma laughed. "I can see that." As the afternoon passed, they worked side by side, sorting books and repairing old covers. Their conversation felt easy, as if they had known each other much longer than a few hours. They spoke about favorite childhood stories, simple dreams, and the small moments that made life meaningful. Neither of them tried to impress the other. When the work was finished, rain suddenly began pouring outside. Emma looked through the window. "I forgot my umbrella." Daniel picked up an old umbrella leaning beside the door. "You can borrow mine." She shook her head. "Then you'll get soaked." "I've been caught in worse storms." She smiled. "Then let's share it." The two walked slowly through the rain beneath the same umbrella, laughing whenever the wind pushed the rain toward them. It wasn't an expensive dinner or a luxury vacation. It was simply two strangers enjoying an ordinary evening. As they reached her apartment building, Emma paused. "Thank you for today." "I should be thanking you." "For what?" "For reminding me that good conversations still exist." She smiled before disappearing inside. Daniel stood there for another moment, watching the lights turn on in her apartment window. For the first time in a long while, he felt something he had almost forgotten: hope. Across the street, however, someone else had quietly witnessed everything. "Sophia," she folded her arms as she watched Daniel walk away with a peaceful smile. A question suddenly entered her mind: that if he was just an ordinary delivery driver, why did he always carry himself like a man who had absolutely nothing to prove? Daniel could not stop thinking about his walk with Emma. It had been simple. No expensive restaurant. No fancy clothes. No questions about money. She had smiled because of who he was, not because of what he owned. That feeling stayed with him long after the evening ended. The next morning, he unlocked the door to a small warehouse on the edge of the city. From the outside, it looked like an ordinary storage building. Inside, however, everything was spotless and carefully organized. Several employees were already waiting. The moment Daniel stepped inside, they straightened their backs. "Good morning, sir," one of them said. Daniel smiled politely. "Morning, everyone." Before anyone could continue, he quietly raised a hand. "Remember our agreement?" The employees immediately nodded. "Yes, sir." A young assistant approached him with a thick folder. The board members called again. "They want you at today's meeting. They said they can't make another decision without you." Daniel looked at the folder but never opened it. "Tell them I'll join the meeting online tonight." The assistant hesitated. "They still don't understand why you insist on living this way." Daniel's eyes drifted toward the warehouse window. "One day they will." Without another word, he turned and walked away. That afternoon, he visited a quiet hill overlooking the city. Hidden beneath a large oak tree was a simple wooden bench. He sat there for several minutes before reaching into his pocket and pulling out an old photograph that showed a younger Daniel standing beside an elderly couple, his parents. The edges of the picture were worn from years of being carried everywhere. He gently smiled. "I haven't forgotten." A soft breeze moved through the trees as memories filled his mind. Years earlier, his father had built one of the country's largest companies from nothing. But after his success became public, everything changed. Friends became strangers. Relatives appeared asking for money. Every conversation seemed to have a price. Even kindness started to feel like a business deal. Before his father passed away, he gave Daniel one final piece of advice. "If you ever want to know who truly loves you, never let your money speak before your heart." Those words had never left him. Daniel looked back at the city skyline. That was why he drove an old van, that was why he wore a worn jacket, that was why almost nobody knew his real name. It wasn't because he was ashamed of being rich. It was because he wanted one honest relationship before the world discovered his fortune. As the sun slowly disappeared behind the buildings, Daniel carefully placed the photograph back into his pocket. "I'll keep my promise," he whispered. That very moment, his phone began ringing. The caller ID displayed only one name, Chairman Williams. Daniel answered quietly. "Yes." The voice on the other end sounded urgent. "Sir, someone has started asking questions about you." Daniel's peaceful expression faded for the first time. "Who?" There was a brief silence, then came the answer. "A woman named Sophia." Daniel slowly lowered the phone, knowing one thing for certain: the quiet life he had protected for so long was about to become much more complicated. Sophia had never questioned her choices. In her eyes, success was easy to recognize. It wore expensive watches, drove luxury cars, and never repeated the same outfit twice. She spent her weekends at fashionable restaurants, posting carefully edited photos online while her friends admired the glamorous life she wanted everyone to believe she already had. Whenever someone mentioned finding a kind or honest partner, she simply laughed. "Kindness doesn't pay the bills," she often said. "I'd rather cry in a mansion than smile in a tiny apartment." Her friends laughed along, even though some secretly felt uncomfortable hearing her speak that way. One afternoon, Sophia met a wealthy businessman named Victor at an exclusive rooftop cafe. His designer suit, sports car, and confident smile checked every box on her list. She spent the entire afternoon trying to impress him, believing she had finally found the perfect man. But as soon as another attractive woman entered the cafe, Victor barely looked at Sophia again. Within minutes, he excused himself and walked away without even saying goodbye. Sophia forced a smile until he disappeared, but inside she felt embarrassed. Her friends noticed the change immediately. "Maybe he wasn't worth your time," one of them said gently. Sophia shrugged. "There are plenty of rich men in this city." Yet her confidence no longer sounded as convincing as before. A few days later, while shopping downtown, Sophia unexpectedly saw Daniel again. He was helping Emma carry several grocery bags across the street. The two of them were laughing about something so simple that neither noticed Sophia watching from the opposite sidewalk. Emma looked genuinely happy. Daniel listened whenever she spoke, and every smile between them felt natural instead of forced. There were no expensive gifts. No luxury cars. No attempt to impress each other. Just quiet happiness. Sophia frowned. "I don't understand," she whispered to herself. One of her friends standing beside her noticed the couple too. They actually look good together. Sophia crossed her arms. "She's settling for less." Her friend looked at her thoughtfully. "Or maybe she's choosing someone who treats her well." Sophia rolled her eyes, refusing to admit those words bothered her. That evening, another expensive dinner ended the same way as before. The successful men she chased were interested only in appearances, short conversations, and temporary attention. None of them asked about her dreams. None cared about who she really was. Meanwhile, Daniel and Emma continued spending time together at the library, community events, and neighborhood cafes, building something that money could not buy. As the days passed, people around them quietly began noticing the difference between the two women. One kept chasing wealth without finding happiness. The other found happiness without ever asking about wealth. Sophia refused to believe she was making a mistake. But with every passing day, her pride grew louder than her heart, and it was slowly leading her toward a choice she would one day regret. Daniel and Emma never needed expensive places to enjoy each other's company. Most evenings were spent walking through quiet parks, visiting the community library, or sharing coffee at the same little cafe where everyone knew their names. Their conversations flowed so naturally that hours passed without either of them noticing. They laughed often, but they also listened carefully. Neither tried to impress the other. They simply enjoyed being together, and that made every moment feel genuine. One Saturday morning, Emma invited Daniel to help renovate a small playground for children in a nearby neighborhood. Volunteers painted swings, repaired benches, and planted flowers around the park. Without hesitation, Daniel picked up a shovel and worked alongside everyone else. His hands became covered in dirt, but he never slowed down. Whenever someone struggled with a difficult task, he quietly stepped in to help without expecting recognition. Emma watched him from across the playground. She noticed how patient he was with the children, how respectfully he spoke to the elderly volunteers, and how he always let others take credit for the work they completed together. Later that afternoon, they sat beneath a large tree to rest. Emma handed Daniel a bottle of water and smiled. "You know something?" she said. Daniel looked at her curiously. "What?" She laughed softly. "I've never seen someone work this hard and complain this little." Daniel smiled. "Complaining never finishes the job." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "My father used to say something similar." For a moment, silence settled between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was peaceful. As children laughed nearby, Emma looked at Daniel. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why do you always help people you've never even met?" Daniel watched a little boy proudly show his freshly painted bench to his mother. "Because everyone carries a burden we can't see," he answered quietly. "Sometimes the smallest kindness can make the heaviest day easier." Emma didn't respond immediately. She simply looked at him with quiet admiration. No expensive gift could have impressed her more than those simple words. As the weeks passed, their friendship grew stronger. They celebrated small victories together, encouraged each other during difficult days, and slowly became the first person each wanted to call whenever something good happened. Neither spoke about love, yet it quietly found its place between them. But not everyone viewed their relationship the same way. One afternoon, Emma met an old college friend at a shopping center. After seeing Daniel waiting beside his old van, the woman lowered her voice. "Emma, is that really the man you're spending time with?" Emma smiled proudly. "Yes." Her friend looked surprised. You deserve someone much more successful. Emma glanced toward Daniel, who was helping an elderly stranger load groceries into a car before even noticing their conversation. A gentle smile crossed her face. Maybe, she replied. Or maybe I've already found someone truly successful. Her friend looked confused, unable to understand what Emma saw so clearly. But as more people began judging Daniel for what they believed he lacked, an even bigger question quietly began to grow. Could a relationship built on honesty survive a world that measured people by money instead of character? The following Monday began like every other day. Daniel loaded his old van before sunrise and drove across the city, believing nothing unusual would happen. But before noon, the quiet routine he had carefully protected began slipping through his fingers. While delivering office supplies to a downtown building, an elderly security guard suddenly froze. He stared at Daniel for several seconds before his eyes widened with recognition. "Excuse me, have we met before?" he asked. Daniel smiled politely. "I don't think so." The guard frowned, clearly trying to remember. "I'm sure I've seen you somewhere important." Daniel simply thanked him for accepting the delivery and walked away before the conversation could continue. The old man's confused expression remained long after the van disappeared around the corner. Later that afternoon, Daniel met Emma at the community library. They spent the day organizing a charity book sale for local families. Everything felt peaceful until Daniel's phone began vibrating repeatedly inside his jacket pocket. He looked at the screen for only a second before quickly silencing it. Emma noticed his expression. "Everything okay?" she asked gently. Daniel forced a small smile. "Just work." She nodded without asking another question, respecting his privacy, but curiosity quietly settled in her mind. As they packed the last box of books, a little girl accidentally tripped and dropped a stack of novels across the floor. Daniel immediately knelt beside her to help. As he reached into his pocket, a polished silver card holder slipped onto the floor. Before he could pick it up, Emma noticed the elegant company logo engraved across the front. It looked nothing like something a delivery driver would normally carry. Daniel quickly placed it back into his pocket before she could read the name. Emma looked surprised but chose not to mention it. That evening, Daniel stopped at a quiet restaurant to pick up a meal for an elderly neighbor who could no longer leave her apartment. As he waited near the entrance, a sharply dressed businessman walked through the lobby. The moment he saw Daniel, he immediately smiled with respect. "Mister," before the man could finish speaking, Daniel gave him a subtle look. The businessman instantly understood. "I'm sorry," he said, changing his words. "I thought you were someone else." Daniel smiled politely. "It happens." The businessman quietly walked away, but the restaurant manager had witnessed everything. He glanced back and forth between the two men, wondering why someone so wealthy had almost greeted an ordinary delivery driver with such respect. That night, Daniel finally answered one of the calls he had been avoiding. "Sir," a familiar voice said urgently, "the shareholders are demanding to meet you in person. We can't keep delaying this." Daniel closed his eyes. "Give me a little more time." After ending the call, he stood silently beside his apartment window, staring at the city lights below. Every passing day made his secret harder to protect, and somewhere in that same city, more than one person had already begun putting the pieces together. Sophia could no longer ignore the feeling that something about Daniel didn't make sense. Every time she saw him, another question appeared. He lived like an ordinary man, yet people treated him with unusual respect. He wore old clothes, but he never looked embarrassed. He drove an aging van, but his confidence never seemed to fade. The more she thought about him, the more frustrated she became. One evening, while having coffee with her friends, Daniel's name came up again. "Emma seems really happy these days," one friend said. "I heard she's spending almost every weekend with Daniel." Sophia forced a laugh. "She'll regret it once reality catches up with her." Another friend looked at Sophia carefully. "Then why do you keep talking about him?" The question caught her off guard. She quickly changed the subject, but deep inside, she couldn't stop wondering why Daniel never reacted the way other men did. Most people tried to impress her. Daniel had simply walked away. That quiet confidence continued bothering her more than she wanted to admit. The following afternoon, curiosity finally defeated her pride. She drove to the neighborhood where Daniel lived and parked across the street from his apartment building. She expected to find signs of a struggling life, but instead she saw something completely different. The elderly woman from the first floor smiled warmly as Daniel carried her groceries upstairs. A young boy ran over to thank him for fixing his bicycle the day before. The apartment manager shook Daniel's hand with genuine respect before wishing him a good evening. Nobody treated him with pity. They treated him with admiration. Sophia frowned. "This doesn't make sense," she whispered. The next morning, she followed Daniel from a distance as he made deliveries across the city. At every stop, people greeted him by name. Shop owners welcomed him with smiles. Children waved excitedly whenever his old van appeared. Even strangers seemed happy to see him. It wasn't the reaction people usually had toward an ordinary delivery driver. Then something unexpected happened. Daniel stopped outside a luxury hotel. Sophia quickly parked across the street and watched carefully. A black limousine pulled into the entrance. Two men in expensive suits stepped out. One of them immediately walked toward Daniel with obvious respect. Before reaching him, the man discreetly handed Daniel a sealed envelope. Daniel accepted it without opening it, spoke only a few quiet words, and the two businessmen returned to the limousine before driving away. Sophia stared in disbelief. What kind of delivery driver meets people like that? Her heart began racing. She waited until Daniel left, then hurried across the street. The hotel receptionist recognized the limousine immediately. Curious, Sophia smiled politely. "Excuse me," she asked. "The gentleman who was just outside, do you know who he is?" The receptionist looked toward the door for a moment before answering. "I'm sorry, ma'am." His expression suddenly became professional. "I'm not allowed to discuss our VIP guests." Sophia felt her stomach tighten. VIP guests, Daniel. For the first time since rejecting him, she realized she might have made a mistake far bigger than hurting someone's feelings. She may have walked away from a man whose true identity was still completely hidden. The truth came on an ordinary Tuesday morning. Daniel was helping an elderly customer carry heavy grocery bags when a black luxury sedan stopped beside the sidewalk. A sharply dressed man stepped out, looked around nervously, and hurried toward him. Before Daniel could stop him, the man said, "Sir, the board meeting starts in 40 minutes. Everyone is waiting for you." Daniel's face tightened. "Not here," he whispered. "We'll talk later." But the words had already reached the ears of several people nearby. They exchanged confused looks. Why would someone in an expensive suit call a man in a worn jacket, "sir"? Daniel calmly thanked the elderly woman, picked up his bicycle, and rode away before anyone could ask another question. Yet whispers spread through town faster than the morning wind, and for the first time, the quiet life he had carefully protected began to crack. Meanwhile, Sophia could not stop thinking about what she had heard. The man she had laughed at now seemed surrounded by strange secrets. Her pride refused to let the mystery go. She hired someone to investigate him, convinced she would uncover another ordinary lie. Instead, she received a thick folder that changed everything. Inside were company records, newspaper articles, and photographs. Daniel was not a struggling worker at all. He was the only heir to one of the largest family-owned business groups in the country. His personal fortune was worth hundreds of millions, yet he had chosen to live quietly for years. Sophia stared at the papers with trembling hands. Every cruel word she had spoken came rushing back. The jacket she mocked had been a choice. The simple apartment had been a choice. Even the ordinary job had been a choice. Across town, Emma received the same shocking truth in a completely different way. Daniel finally invited her to a quiet family dinner. Instead of taking her to a luxury restaurant, he brought her to a peaceful estate hidden behind tall trees. As the gates slowly opened, she froze. The long driveway, beautiful gardens, an elegant mansion looked nothing like the life she thought he lived. Daniel smiled gently at her stunned expression. "I wanted you to know me before you knew this place," he said softly. Emma looked into his eyes instead of at the mansion. "I'm glad I did," she replied with a warm smile. In that simple answer Daniel finally found the proof he had spent years searching for. His greatest secret was no longer hidden, but an even bigger question now stood before everyone. Would people judge him differently because of his wealth, or would they finally see the man he had always been? Sophia barely slept after learning the truth. Every memory haunted her. She remembered the cruel laughter, the mocking words, and the cold look she had given Daniel on the day he had simply asked her to share a cup of coffee. At the time, she believed she had rejected a poor man with no future. Now she knew she had humiliated someone who had everything she claimed to admire. But deep inside, another uncomfortable truth began to surface. Was she really sorry for hurting him, or was she only sorry because he turned out to be incredibly wealthy? That question followed her everywhere, yet she refused to answer it honestly. Instead, she convinced herself that she still had a chance to fix everything. The next morning, she waited outside Daniel's workplace. When he arrived, she forced a gentle smile and stepped in front of him. "Can we please talk?" she asked softly. Daniel stopped but kept a respectful distance. "Of course," he replied calmly. Sophia lowered her eyes. "I made a terrible mistake. I judged you without knowing you. I'm truly sorry." Daniel listened without interrupting. His expression remained kind, but there was no excitement in his eyes. Before he could respond, Sophia quickly added, "People deserve a second chance. Maybe we could start over." Daniel smiled politely. "Everyone deserves kindness," he said. "But trust is much harder to rebuild." His answer was gentle, yet it closed a door she had hoped was still open. Sophia refused to give up. She began appearing wherever Daniel went. She brought expensive gifts that he quietly declined. She praised his success in front of others, even though she had once mocked his simple life. She even tried convincing mutual friends that she had always misunderstood him. But the more she tried to rewrite the past, the more obvious her true motivation became. She never spoke about his kindness, his patience, or the people he had helped. She only talked about his business, his fortune, and the luxurious future they could have together. Emma noticed the change immediately. One evening she gently asked Daniel, "Do you think she's really changed?" Daniel looked out the window before answering. "People can change," he said softly. "But real change begins with the heart, not with a bank account." Those words stayed with Emma long after the conversation ended. Meanwhile, Sophia made one final attempt. She sent Daniel a heartfelt letter filled with apologies and promises, hoping emotion would succeed where pride had failed. Daniel carefully folded the letter after reading it. He felt no anger toward her anymore, only quiet peace. He had already forgiven the pain she caused, but forgiveness did not mean returning to the past. As Sophia waited desperately for his answer, one question remained. Would Daniel open that closed chapter again, or would he choose the future that had already begun leading him toward genuine love? Daniel stood alone beside the quiet lake where he often went to think. The evening sky reflected on the still water, reminding him how much his life had changed in only a few weeks. The truth about his identity was no longer hidden. People who once ignored him now greeted him with bright smiles. Some praised his success. Others suddenly wanted to become his friend. Yet instead of feeling victorious, Daniel felt strangely disappointed. Wealth had changed the way people looked at him, but it had not changed the man he had always been. He asked himself one difficult question. Who had truly seen him before anyone knew the truth? The answer came without hesitation. It was Emma. She had never cared about the old jacket, the simple apartment, or the ordinary job. She had laughed with him during quiet walks, shared simple meals without complaint, and believed in his character long before anyone admired his success. That realization became more valuable than every business deal his family had ever completed. The next afternoon, Daniel invited Emma to the small park where they had first met. She smiled as she arrived, carrying 2 cups of coffee just as she always did. Nothing about her had changed. She looked at him with the same warm eyes she had on the first day. Sitting together on a wooden bench, neither of them rushed to speak. The silence felt peaceful instead of uncomfortable. Finally, Emma smiled and asked, "Does everyone treat you differently now?" Daniel gave a quiet laugh. "Almost everyone," he admitted. "Except you." Emma looked confused. "Why would I?" she replied. "You're still the same man who helped strangers before anyone was watching." Daniel lowered his eyes for a moment before speaking again. "That's exactly why I'm here." He thanked her for believing in him when there was no reason to expect anything in return. He told her that every simple moment they had shared meant more to him than the luxury he had spent years trying to ignore. Emma reached for his hand and smiled gently. "I never fell in love with a bank account," she whispered. "I fell in love with the man who always chose kindness." Those simple words removed the last doubt from Daniel's heart. For the first time in years, he no longer questioned whether genuine love truly existed. He had already found it. Across town, Sophia watched from a distance as the 2 of them walked away together, laughing about something only they understood. She finally realized that the greatest thing she had lost was never Daniel's fortune. It was the chance to be loved by someone whose heart had always been genuine. As Daniel and Emma walked toward an uncertain but hopeful future, one final decision still remained. How would Daniel use everything he had learned to shape the rest of his life, and what ending would bring peace to everyone involved? On a bright Saturday afternoon, the town gathered in the community park for the opening of a new education center funded by Daniel's Family Foundation. Reporters, business leaders, neighbors, and old friends filled the seats, eager to hear from the man whose hidden identity had surprised everyone. Many expected Daniel to speak about success, money, or business. Instead, he walked onto the stage with a calm smile and invited Emma to stand beside him. The crowd applauded, wondering what he was about to say. Daniel looked at Emma with quiet gratitude before turning toward the audience. "People often ask me why I hid my name and my wealth for so many years," he began. "The answer is simple. I wanted to know who would respect me when I had nothing to offer except my heart." The park fell completely silent. "Many people admired me after learning who I was," he continued. "But only one person believed in me before she knew anything about my fortune. She saw kindness instead of money. She saw character instead of status. That is the kind of love that cannot be bought." Emma's eyes filled with tears as Daniel gently took her hand. She had never asked for expensive gifts or a luxurious life. She had simply accepted him exactly as he was. In front of everyone, Daniel smiled and said, "The greatest investment I have ever made is trusting the woman who trusted me first." The crowd rose to its feet with warm applause. Even those who had doubted Daniel before could see the sincerity in his words. Standing near the back of the crowd, Sophia quietly watched the moment unfold. She felt the weight of every decision she had made. No one laughed at her. No one pointed fingers. Daniel never mentioned her name or reminded anyone of the painful rejection that had started everything. His silence became the greatest lesson of all. Instead of seeking revenge, he chose dignity. Instead of embarrassing her, he allowed her to face the truth on her own. Sophia lowered her eyes, finally understanding that judging people by appearances had cost her something far greater than wealth. It had cost her the chance to know an honest and loving man. As the celebration ended, Daniel and Emma walked through the park surrounded by family, friends, and children whose futures would benefit from the new education center. Their happiness came not from luxury but from trust, respect, and shared purpose. Daniel had gained far more than public admiration. He had found the one thing he had searched for all along, a love that never depended on his fortune. And as the sun slowly disappeared beyond the horizon, one timeless truth remained. Wealth may attract attention, but character earns lasting love. The people who value your heart before your success are the ones worth keeping beside you for the rest of your life.